Okay, we're back. Back with Barb. Back with Barb in bed. To banter in her bedroom. Okay, I'll stop. Okay, we're going to continue on talking about your epilepsy, honey. And let's get to the basics. Your seizures, what are they? What do they do? What kind of damage do they do? What are the consequences of having a seizure? And let's talk about your brain infection that you had. Where do you want to start?
Let's start with the types of seizures. Okay, well, I get simple partial seizures, complex partial seizures, and I also get tonic-clonic seizures. Absent seizures, which are classified as simple partial seizures as well.
Sort of like what the dog seems to be having right now?
Yeah. Absent seizures are basically, absent seizures just look basically where you just zone out for a couple of seconds, usually no longer than 5 seconds. That's the best way to explain it anyway. It looks like you're zoning out.
Daydreaming.
Yes.
How long do they last?
About 5 seconds. To me, it feels like about 10 seconds, but I would say probably about 5 seconds, maybe even a little bit shorter. When I have them, excuse me, I call them my memory seizures, because I always have a specific memory with them, or a specific set of memories that go with them.
Like, can you explain that? Like, what do you mean?
Really strange. Some of the memories are real memories that might be from my childhood, and there's a few that are repetitive memories that I have over and over again that are just me being in different places, in different scenes.
Now, they're not real memories, these ones?
No.
They're just something that your mind just creates on its own.
But it happens over and over again. Like, I mean, I've had these seizures, I couldn't even tell you how many times. And as soon as I have it, I know that it's a seizure. Sometimes it's a warning sign to me or that there's a larger seizure coming. Lately, more times than not, it's followed by a larger seizure. The complex seizures that I have usually involve me picking at my clothes, playing with my hands in any sort of manner, picking at my nails. It could involve me playing with my hair, twitching a little bit, one hand or the other hand, or just one foot twitching or the other foot twitching. Just simple body movements that just aren't normal, that you wouldn't really see. Again, sometimes it's hard to tell. Once you get to know me really well and know my seizures, you would know that I'm having one. Now, with a complex seizure, you do lose consciousness. With a simple seizure, you're still there. With a complex seizure, you have a loss of awareness. Many different kinds of things, and I've noticed lately that with my seizure types, I'm having many like symptoms with them. So it seems like they're changing all the time. Like, I'm having a lot of new speech symptoms occur, loss of words, or struggling to search for a word and not being able to find a word. That's considered, I believe that that is considered a simple partial seizure. That's very common with me. A lot of the times I'll be having a conversation with somebody on the phone, or I'll go to the bank or to a store or something, and they'll ask me a question, and I'll just stand there and look at them, and look at them, and look at them, and the information just doesn't compute with me. And I'll pull and pull and pull at my brain, and it'll come eventually, and I'll know that I'm having a seizure. Wait it through, it'll come. And it's very frustrating, but it's what I do. Same thing with, like, sometimes I forget how to use my bank card. Sounds like a silly thing, but there's been quite a few times where I've gone to the bank machine and I don't know. It'll come to me eventually, but that's I think it's a simple partial. So I'm not sure if that's coming from my frontal lobe or my temporal lobe. And I also get the, of course, tonic-clonic ones, where I convulse. Sometimes I black right out, where I fall and I convulse. Sometimes lately have been getting a lot of ones where I'm actually wide awake, and I don't lose consciousness and I convulse. And those ones are a lot worse for me because it's very scary being awake through those violent convulsions and not being able to speak. Because I'm lying there and I can't vocalize, and I'm fully aware of what's going on with my body. I actually much prefer to be unconscious during all that going on. And lately I've been having a type that I'm not really sure what it is, but I've been having a lot of shaking going on, where I'll just start to shake, usually in my hands, and it'll progress to the other hand or to my foot on the same side, and then to the other foot sometimes, maybe to the other hand, and I'll just kind of slump over. I had one of those today, where I was sitting on the side of the bed, and my speech got all funny, and it just went slurred, and my hand started to go like this, and I slumped over. And I couldn't keep my head up, and I slumped over and fell, and I stayed awake, but I couldn't pull myself onto the bed. I just had to lay there until it passed. So, yeah, lots of interesting different stuff, and they seem to change all the time. So,
now, can you explain briefly what is happening to your brain physically when you're having a seizure?
well, basically what happens, the best way that I could explain it is the neurons are misfiring in the brain.
Misfiring how?
Well, the electricity between the neurons isn't firing properly, so the electricity isn't connecting. Maybe you can explain it a little bit better than me. But the neurons become damaged. Like every time you have a seizure, it basically does damage and eventually kills those neurons. So over time, you're killing neurons in that area. And once they're dead, they're dead. So,
because brain tissue doesn't regenerate.
Right. So,
now, the way I heard it likened was like looking at a whole bunch of different colored lights that are just flashing randomly. And those random flashes of lights are like the brain when it's performing normally. Each different light represents a different area of the brain. And when they fire off randomly. That's the brain doing what it normally does. And in a seizure, what happens is all those lights flash on and off at the same time. So that your brain kind of overloads itself, and it tries to get your body to do too many things at once. And that's where the seizure comes in. It's like your brain is telling your body to do conflicting information at the same time, like it's telling you to walk but to stay still at the same time.
Yeah, it's hyper
activity.
Yes, thank you.
Now, like you said in the last segment, you were having minor seizures, like what I like to call snapshot seizures or flashbulbs, where they just seem to come and go like the snap of a finger or a blink of an eye. When we watched the last segments, you recognized that you were having those. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. You mentioned that when you were younger, you had a brain infection. Can you tell us more about that?
When I was actually at the epilepsy clinic having some testing done, I had sorry, I'm actually having some speech problems right now, which probably is a small seizure, so just bear with me. Maybe you can help me out. Things that they put on your head.
Electrodes?
Yes. I had the electrodes surgically implanted. The difference with when they surgically implant them is you do go into surgery and they lift the scalp and they put them right actually on the surface of the brain. So imagine that you have the electrodes actually sitting here on the surface of your brain. That gives the neurologist a much easier and better read of the electrical activity that's going on. Subdural, So I was there for a few weeks while they were reading that and getting that information. And when I had gone home, I had started to get some terrible headaches. Terrible headaches, and I thought they were migraines. And I'd gone into Emerge several times for migraine treatment and had no luck, and they just kept getting worse and worse. And thankfully had gone back, well actually, I think it was two or maybe 3 days before Christmas. I have quite a few burr holes where the surgery had taken place, and my husband had actually been looking at the incisions and had kind of looked at one, and it was quite disgusting, but a big burst of infected pus came flying out. So he rushed me back to the hospital, and while we were waiting in the emergency room, I got up and went to get water, and I went down into a grand mal on the floor in the emergency room. And next thing I knew, I woke up in the clinic with a bald head, shaved head, and they told me that I had emergency surgery and that I had a massive brain infection. It was actually worse than meningitis because it was right on the actual brain itself. So it was pretty scary, and thank thank God that I had gotten in that day because, I thought they were just migraines and would have never known that it was an infection. But it was a pretty long recovery. I had pretty much no short-term memory after the infection. I didn't know my body parts, didn't know my phone number. Everything was scrambled. I had to get I believe it was a social worker, a neurosocial worker. She would come in and coach me and work with me on my body parts because I thought everything was backwards. She would point to my elbow and say, "What's this?" And I'd say, "My knee." And she said, "Well, what's this?" And I'd say, "My foot." So everything up here was just completely still, which, as you can imagine, was really frustrating for me. I didn't remember names or phone numbers, but I was very, very lucky. Very, very, very thankful and very, very lucky to be alive after that. So I spent some time in the hospital and came home.
What triggers a seizure? In your experience, we know that rapid flashing movements like what's seen on older televisions and computer monitors may trigger a seizure. In fact, many video games and televisions come with an anti-epileptic warning that says if you start to feel dizzy or nauseous while playing the game or watching the TV, to immediately turn it off and go do something else until you settle down again. What triggers a seizure for you?
Weather is definitely a trigger for me. The weather changing or the barometric pressure changing is definitely kind of be a trigger for me. Stress is definitely a trigger. Lack of sleep can be a trigger. Anxiety kind of goes with the stress. So I try and avoid that as much as I can. Missing my meds definitely is a trigger. Hormonal fluctuations is definitely a big trigger.
What about flashing lights or alternating patterns?
I'm not 100%. I think sometimes, and then sometimes I'm not sure.
The reason I ask is you mentioned the other day that you were looking at the lines on the road, the alternating between the dark of the pavement and the light color of the lines themselves. And you said you started to feel uncomfortable.
Stuff like that makes me feel uncomfortable sometimes, like anxious. But I don't know if it's gonna trigger. I don't know if that's a trigger for a seizure. I find overstimulation.
Like, what do you mean?
Crowds. I can't take crowds. Parties. Big groups of people. Groups of people that I don't know. Sometimes like malls or like grocery stores where there's a lot of people. Sometimes background noise. If there's too much background noise, like, or varying background noise, like if there's a TV going and then music going at the same time, I find that very agitating. I seem to have a very Like, I seem to be very sensitive to noise. And I don't know what that is. I don't know why that is. I never used to be like that at all. So I don't know if that's triggered or if it's part of the medication or part of epilepsy or just me or or like if it's part of where the seizures are coming from, because I know that the lobes that are affected have a lot to do with my emotional center and stuff like that. So I don't know. But thunderstorms, I think, like lightning sometimes, I think, is a trigger for me.
You mentioned that typically, if I can be so bold as to use that word, that typically during a seizure, the average person generally remains unaware that a seizure has in fact taken place. The only reason that they'll notice it is because of a perceived jump in time from what they were doing, then a general unawareness during the seizure, and then a sudden return to awareness after the seizure has passed. But you said that you'd been experiencing a type of seizure where you remain aware through the entire process. Can you expand a bit more on that?
Yeah. It's just like a classic grand mal or tonic-clonic seizure, exactly. I have this really intense feeling of agitation come over me. Or, yeah, I guess agitation is a good word, or stress. Just really agitated, almost irritated, but more agitated. And I can almost feel my whole body just tensing up. And I'm learning now to know that that's a sign for me. And usually I go and lie down and wait to see if something's going to happen, and then I'll go into the convulsions. And
what goes through your mind when you're having a seizure but you're fully aware of what's going on? I imagine that must be very frightening.
yeah, it's terrifying. Because I can feel the pain, like I can feel my muscles, how much they're hurting, and I want to call out. And say, I'm still here, but I can't, because when I do try and verbalize, all that comes out is garble. And most of the time when I'm in it, I don't have an ability to speak. There's just nothing there. Or I'll be told afterwards that I was making a lot of noise, and that I don't realize. So I think I'm actually in and out with these. Because it seems like there's black spots in between where I am blacking out a little bit. But most of the time, I'm just lying there thinking, please, God, make this stop. Please hurry up and just let it be over. Why do I have to be awake through this? Especially when I'm alone. Because when I'm alone, not that I'm alone a lot when these happen, but when I'm alone, I don't know when it's going to stop. I don't know. sometimes I just don't know. It's a feeling of just not knowing.
And that's the most terrifying aspect.
At least when you're blacked out and unconscious, you wake up an hour or so later and you know. Okay. Sometimes when I'm awake, I'll be biting my tongue and I'll be clenching my tongue between my teeth and I can't do anything about it. So I'll be, feeling myself biting through, not through my tongue, but, pretty darn hard, or through my lip, and I can't do anything about it, even though I'm awake. Or, flailing my arm pretty hard on something and hurting it, and I can feel that it's hurting, but I have no control over stopping it. I'd rather just be unconscious and deal with the pain afterwards. But my neurologist said, I think how he explained it was, the part of my brain that it's coming from is not fully involved, and that's why I'm able to stay awake.
Is this a new development?
Yes, it is new. But a lot of the seizure types are really, really new. Like, a lot of weird stuff's been going on. Like, the twitching stuff, and I never used to have twitching of any sort. Like, I've done a lot of researching on seizure types, and the more research I do, the more I realize that a lot of stuff that I've done has actually been seizures, and it actually makes me feel, it actually kind of comforts me and makes me feel better, because, in a way, because I think, oh, well, okay, well, I wasn't just doing that, it was actually a seizure. Okay, there's a reason why. Why that was happening. So, but, like my neurologist explained, the longer that your seizures go untreated, the more they will spread and change. Because I guess it's kind of like any disease or disorder. The more that it's left, the more that it progresses and the more that it changes. So the more that it's uncontrolled, the more that it's allowed to develop and change. So that's what's going on with me, I guess, is things are changing.
Alright, well that seems like a good place to stop for now. And the next ones, I just want to talk about your experiences in the hospital and talk about some of the meds that you've been on, what they do, and why they've been changed. So, thank you for your time.